Ahoy, and welcome to Prague and another episode of the Mars Guide. Now in this episode we're going to talk about the beautiful Estates Theatre behind me. We're going to talk about its association with Mozart, the famous composer, its association with revolution here in Prague, not the Velvet Revolution that you might have heard of recently, but the series of revolutions that swept Europe in 1848. We're also going to talk about the Czech national anthem, which was heard here for the first time, and also we're going to talk about this. What's that all about? Now, they started building this theatre in 1781, but it took slightly longer to complete than was originally intended. When they announced they were going to build it here in the fruit market, it's still called the fruit market today, people objected to its construction, just like people do today. You know, people say, well, it'll spoil the view, it won't let in the sunlight, I need to sunbathe. Now, one of the biggest objectors to the construction of the theatre here was Charles University, which is slap bang next door. Now, they weren't complaining that the students wouldn't be able to sunbathe, rather it's thought that with not enough sunlight it would make the lecture theatres all dark and gloomy. And so the opponents of this construction banded together and they arranged for a group of men to come in every night and try and undo the building work for the previous day. So it took slightly longer before it was eventually opened in 1783. So the theatre was commissioned by Franz Anton Karl of Neustitz, Rieneck. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And what he wanted to do was to build a theatre to please and enlighten his Bohemian friends, and also to compete with Vienna, because quite often theatre companies and opera companies would rather go to Vienna than they would do to Prague. The original plans were for a late Baroque, or Baroque as people say in the United States, and the architect Anton Hafenecker went for a classical style with symmetry and Corinthian columns, and above the entrance is inscribed the motto Patriae et Muses, to the fatherland and the muses. Now, this theatre's association with Mozart is that this is the only theatre still standing in the world where Mozart actually premiered and performed at one of his own operas, and that opera was Don Giovanni, which we're going to come back to later. Now, when I do my tours and I come to this bit and I say to my tourists, oh, have you heard of Mozart? Do you know who Mozart is? Now, sometimes of course they do know, and of course sometimes people don't know. Well, that's to be expected because people come from different parts of the world and they have different interests. Also, I realized maybe I have to say Mozart in a different way. Maybe I have to say Mozart or Mozart. I was doing a tour here about 3 years ago, and I had a couple of French students with me right in the front there. And I went on to the next stop, and as we're going to the next stop, I got a little tap on the shoulder, and I turned round, and it was one of the French students, and he said, "Excuse me, can you tell me who was that composer you were talking about?" And I said, "Mozart." And I could see him thinking for a moment, and eventually he went, "Mozart." So you see, I might have to say it in a different way. So, back to Mozart. Mozart was a child genius born in 1756. Now, the music playing at the moment is his first minuet and trio in G major, and is believed to be the first piece composed by Mozart at the age of 5. Okay, not hugely complex, but most of us at that age are struggling to communicate with the world, probably still wetting the bed and trying to avoid having an accident in our pants. He wrote his first symphony at 8 and his first piano concerto at 11. As you can imagine, his parents were very proud, but that did not stop them having an eye to cashing in on the talents of their children. So Mozart and his sister, Maria Anna, known as Nanel, were paraded around Europe to entertain much of the royalty of Europe. As a child, he was a phenomenon, but as he got older, the fascination began to wear off, and like artists today, he struggled to find work as a composer. He was young, his behavior upset people, and many were jealous of him because of his clearly awesome talent. Now, all of these facets are explored brilliantly in the now almost 40-year-old film Amadeus, which was filmed here in Prague and in the Estates Theatre. But we'll come back to that. Now, Mozart's opera, The Marriage of Figaro, didn't receive many productions in Vienna. I think it only received maybe 9 performances, and it needed 20 to be a success. The reasons why it wasn't very well accepted is possibly because of jealousy, possibly because the conservatives, who believe in a conservative approach to opera, they didn't like his approach, the German approach, using Singspiel, which is kind of a play with music. They much preferred the Italian approach, using the recitatives, if you like, to move the plot and the story forward. Also, the toffs and posh people were put off by the social and political implications of the play on which the opera had been based. Originally, it was a farce by the French author Beaumarchais. In France, the play had originally been banned, so with all of this against him, that is why it only received a few performances. But here in Prague, they loved it, as they did all of Mozart's music. Mozart loved coming to Prague. In fact, he came here on 4 occasions. And when he came here, he wrote home to his friends and his family saying how much the people of Prague really appreciate him and his music. He said, "The people of Prague, the Praguers, really get me." Okay, it's a bit of a loose translation, but I think you really understand. And he said that as he went around Prague, he could always hear his music from his operas being sung and played. Well, it happens, doesn't it? Sometimes people are much more popular in a different country to the country they were brought up in. For example, David Hasselhoff, still huge in Germany. And if you don't know who David Hasselhoff is, you're going to have to Google it. But I'm not trying to equate David Hasselhoff, the star of such greats as Baywatch and Knight Rider, with Mozart. Now, the love of the people of Prague for Mozart was shown on the occasion of his death on December 5th, 1791, and he died at a very early age of 35, probably from a bacterial kidney infection, because this was at a time when there was no antibiotics. Now, he was buried in Vienna, and there was about maybe 4 people at his funeral. He was buried in an unmarked grave, and to this day they don't actually know where the great composer's actually buried. Now, here in Prague, in the following week, they had a huge memorial service for him at the Church of St. Nicholas, which is on the other side of the river. And sometimes he used to give organ concerts there too. And thousands upon thousands of people turned out to pay their respects to the great composer. Mozart didn't only premiere Don Giovanni in Prague, but also his Symphony 38 was heard here for the first time and is now known as the Prague Symphony. And also in September 1791, just 3 months before his death, there was a premiere of another of his operas, La Clemenza di Tito, to celebrate the coronation of the Austrian Emperor Leopold II. But the association with Don Giovanni is much stronger. The Praguers loved The Marriage of Figaro, so his Prague supporters and patrons commissioned him to write an original opera that would be premiered here in Prague. The date was set for October the 14th, 1787, and Mozart came to Prague to finalise the rehearsals, but the cast weren't quite ready, so instead they gave a performance of his Marriage of Figaro. Interestingly, even the day before the premiere, on October the 29th, he hadn't written the overture. Can you imagine that? You have less than 24 hours to write an overture. And your time starts now. Now, apparently his wife Constanza tried to keep him awake by making him endless cups of coffee and talking to him. And eventually, by 7 o'clock in the morning, the overture for Don Giovanni was completed. But this is the time when there's no Xerox, no photocopying. So they had to send it off to the copiers who had to write it out and create all the parts for all the members of the orchestra. Now, it took so long that actually the orchestra didn't get an opportunity to rehearse the overture before the premiere. And Mozart came a little bit late, but nonetheless, it was a huge success, and apparently he got a standing ovation for nearly 30 minutes, and it's sort of a bit of a tradition here in the Czech Republic. The film Amadeus is a huge classic and a brilliantly made film based on the stage play Amadeus by Peter Schaffer. And it tells the story of Mozart, but from the point of view of one of his court rivals, Antonio Salieri. If you love music, if you love the music of Mozart, if you love theatre, if you love drama and good film, you should see this film. Now, despite the fact it was made nearly 40 years ago, it is genuinely a cinematic classic. It won 8 Academy Awards and 11 nominations. It was directed by Milos Forman, a Czech, part of the New Wave cinema in the 1960s. He went off to the United States and he directed such cult classics as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he said, because they were working on a very tight budget for Amadeus, there were only 3 cities in the world they could have used as the backdrop: Vienna, Budapest or Prague. because these were the only cities where that 18th century look had been preserved. Now, I also think partly he chose Prague because he was a Czech exile, returning home almost like the prodigal son, coming back to his home country as the big Hollywood director, conquering hero. But in fairness, if you're going to make a film about the life of Mozart and his music, there's no better place than the Estates Theatre here in Prague. Now the thing is, what I'd say about this theatre, if you ever come to Prague, you must come and see a performance of the opera here at this Estates Theatre, because it truly is a beautiful theatre. It hasn't changed very much since it opened in 1783. It's hugely atmospheric and historic. And of course, with those with an eye to the budget, you can come and see world-class performers here at about a third of the price or a quarter of the price you would get for an opera in the Royal Opera House in London, Covent Garden, or at the Met in New York. So another reason we talk about this theatre is because the Czech national anthem, Kde domov můj, Where is my home, was heard here for the first time in 1834. Now why is that important? Well, as I said before, you have to remember that this country was part of the Austrian Empire, then the Austro-Hungarian Empire for nearly 400 years. If you went around the centre of Prague in the 19th century, the shop names, street names, signs were in German. German was the language of the Austrians. German was the language of education and administration. The song was heard for the first time in the theatre in 1834, and it comes from a comedy singspiel called Fidlovačka, which is partly in Czech and partly in German. And it makes fun of people who don't know their Czech roots. And in this comedy, a blind violinist stands up and he sings a song, Kde domov můj, Where is my home? And this phrase, Where is my home, began to resonate with the Czechs. The song was written by František Škroub, with lyrics by Josef Kajetan Till, and it became more popular here after the revolution in 1848. In fact, 1848 was a good year for revolutions. There was one in Italy, France, Germany and Austria, rioting in Vienna and here too in Prague. Why? Because of many factors. People were fed up with the monarchy, wanted more democracy, freedom of the press, better working conditions, high unemployment because of the Industrial Revolution, and all of this swept across Europe. And in the thick of it, here in Prague, was Josef Kajetan Till. Now, it all started in June 1848. The peaceful protesters came up past the theatre here, down the street behind me, and entered into Soletna. They were marching towards the army headquarters. So there was a minor fracas between opposing groups. It kind of escalated. The army got involved. The soldiers fixed bayonets. There was a cavalry charge. Many people were seriously injured. People were angry about what had happened, so they decided they were going to take on the Austrian army. And they came out and they built barricades on the streets and they armed themselves. The Austrian commander, Alfred Windischgrätz, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, didn't pull any punches. He believed in authoritarianism and certainly wasn't into negotiation. And what made it worse was that his wife, who was actually watching the events, was killed by a stray bullet, and his son was badly injured. Now, there was a standoff between the Austrian troops and the Czechs manning the barricades, and Till was actually commanding one of those barricades. Windischgrätz didn't want to risk losing his troops by fighting hand-to-hand through the myriad of barricades, so a ceasefire came into place. Windischgrätz used this opportunity to remove his troops in the dead of night to the other side of the river and occupy the high ground near to Prague Castle. Then, when he was ready, he bombarded the city with cannon fire and shells for 3 days until eventually the protesters surrendered. After their victory, the Austrians introduced martial law and exacted revenge on those that had opposed them, including Josef Kajetan Till, who lost his position at the theatre, was expelled from Prague, and spent the remaining years of his life as a nomadic actor, eventually dying in poverty 8 years later. So this is an excerpt of the Czech national anthem, Kde domov můj, sung by Emma Destenová, a Czech opera singer, and accompanied by Din Gilly. Now, it sounds a bit crackly because it was recorded in 1914. When and if you come to the Czech Republic, which we hope will be soon, and get some Czech currency, on the 2,000 crown note you will see a picture of a woman, and that woman is Emma Destenová. Now, For me, the Czech national anthem is one of the most melodic, poetic and beautiful national anthems I think I've ever heard. You know, most national anthems, they talk about saving the king, the queen, the emperor, glory of the king, glory of the queen. They talk about blood, sacrifice, glory, killing your enemies, slitting throats, fatherland, motherland, our land above all. Whereas in the Czech national anthem, they talk about bubbling brooks and streams and mountains and blossoming flowers in May. It's poetic, it's beautiful. They talk about the beautiful country that is their country, and that's why I really like it. So behind me is this rather sinister looking sculpture. It's done by a Czech sculptress called Mozart, and it was put here in the year 2000. It's also got another name, which is the Cloak of Conscience. It's actually called Il Commendatore, and it represents a character from Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. He is the father of a young girl that's attacked and raped by Don Giovanni. They have a fight. Don Giovanni kills him. In Act 2, he comes back as this deathly, ghostly figure, and he warns Don Giovanni to change his ways, because if he doesn't, he's going to drag him down into hell. Now, as you can see, it's a hollow statue. And there's a story that some years ago, a young student tourist who'd come to Prague and had too much to drink and some other substances decided, would it not be a good idea to have a look and see what it looked like on the inside? Now, I don't know how she did it. She must have been very petite and very flexible, but not that flexible, because apparently she couldn't get out. And so they struggled to get her out by all manner of things, and eventually out she popped. I don't know if the story is true, but I love telling it anyway. Now, if you do come to Prague, the advice is still the same. If you do come across a hollow statue here, please, 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 do not be tempted to climb inside. So there we are. That completes our look at the beautiful Estates Theatre, Mozart, and the 1848 Revolution. In the next episode, we're going to look at Charles University, the university that complained about the building of the theatre here. And also, we're going to look at Cubism. So, until next time. Thank you for watching. And if you want to be notified about further videos, then please don't forget to click and subscribe and press the little bell button for notifications. Also, if you've got any comments or suggestions about what we could do in future episodes, please let me know in the comments section below. Until next time, thank you.